Pastor George Donaldson from Peoria Christian Reformed Church for our evening devotional, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. We're glad you've joined us. And to open, I'd like to read Heidelberg Catechism Question and Answer 27. What do you understand by the providence of God? Providence is the almighty and ever-present power of God, by which he upholds as with his hand heaven and earth and all creatures, and so rules them that leaf and blade, rain and drought, fruitful and lean years, food and drink, health and sickness, prosperity and poverty, all things in fact come to us, not by chance, but from his fatherly hand. And the good words that we need to remember and reflect on as we live in a situation where there's a pandemic going on, where there's problems in this world that we are personally unable to comprehend, let alone solve. To reflect on God's guiding of history. And we're going to do that again, continuing through the book of Esther. I'm going to read Esther chapter 5. On the third day, this is after they were fasting, as Esther told Mordecai and the other Jews to fast for 3 days. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace, in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her, and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be given you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zeresh his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. "And that's not all," Haman added. "I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a gallows built, 75 feet high, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go to the king to the bank with the king to dinner and be happy." This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the gallows built. I called my devotional, my reflections on this, "Who's pulling the strings?" Because like puppets are moved by strings, but the puppeteer is never seen, In the book of Esther, we never see God explicitly, and yet he's the one behind the scenes, the master moving the puppets. But the thing about God's puppeteering is that we have freedom to choose. We have the ability to make good decisions and bad. Last week we saw in chapter 4 that Esther had to decide, do I choose to identify myself with my people who are condemned to death? Or do I try to hide in my identity as the queen of the empire and seek safety there? Esther had to make that choice. Mordecai laid out reasons, but ultimately Esther was free to choose which way she chose. And she chose to identify herself with the people of God. And it's striking here in this passage, it's the first time she's referred to as putting on her royal robes. Really assuming the dignity and authority of the office of queen happens here in verse 1 after she chooses to identify herself with the Jewish people. God is working in Esther behind the scenes, and in the earlier chapters of Esther, we get the impression that Esther does what she can to please people, to make her way ahead in the harem. But now here, where she chooses to explicitly identify with God's people, and chooses to work for their good, now she steps forward and starts to develop a royal persona, to act with authority and wisdom. We see here in this passage, Jesus puts it, shrewd as a serpent and innocent as a dove. Sometimes we may wonder about why the two banquets. Why doesn't Esther just tell the king what she wants right there in the king's court when he asks her and offers her up to half the kingdom? But we have to remember here, Esther hasn't seen the king in a month. She doesn't know how she stands in his books. I don't know if he's happy to see her today. But what she does know is that Haman, the enemy of the Jews, is the king's right-hand man. The king is delighted with Haman, that has honored Haman. And here, Esther needs to work against Haman. And so she whets the king's appetite, you could say. She's, to use a fishing term, she's playing the fish, making sure she sets the hook. She's leading King Xerxes and Haman along, whetting their curiosity, inviting them to another banquet. And I promise I'll tell you then. What we see here is God working in Esther through her own choices to shape and fashion her into the deliverer that he needs to save his people, to preserve them for Christ to come. God's working, but not obviously. That's what it's like in our lives, isn't it? God's working, but all too often it's not too obvious. We trust he's there behind the scenes, pulling the strings, calling the shots, shaping the circumstances we find ourselves in, and yet we're still free to choose in the midst of it. We're called to choose what is right. We're called to work, knowing that God has done all the work. We need to remember the words that Paul wrote to the Philippians in Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 and 13. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. We act and God acts. God's providential sovereignty is so great that he accomplishes his ends as we make our choices, as we go about our day-to-day lives, as we seek to discern what's right and what's wrong, how do we act, how should we behave in these circumstances, God lets us choose. Sometimes nudging us by His Word and the Holy Spirit, but we choose, and He brings things to His appointed ends, just like He did with Esther. Because the thing is, if we resent the idea of someone pulling our strings, we're just denying a truth. Because whether we want them or not, someone is pulling our strings. And we see this in Haman's actions. I mean, look at Haman. In verse 9, he goes out happy and in high spirits. He got invited to a banquet with the king and Esther and no one else. This is awesome. His head is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what does it take to ruin his day? Walking through the king's gate and seeing Mordecai neither show fear in his presence nor rise. And suddenly Haman's joy evaporates. See, here's the thing. Haman's emotional strings, they weren't pulled by God in the gospel, but rather his were pulled by his idol, which appears to have been public recognition. And if he didn't get public recognition, his idol yanked his strings to make him angry. And if he did get it, his idol pulled his strings and made him happy. But his emotions were entirely dependent on his circumstances. Now, this is Haman, a wicked man. But we can see the same thing in our life and ought to recognize it as well. It's helpful sometimes to stop and think, what pulls my strings? What provokes a reaction? What gets my goat? What makes me really happy and what can just make me angry or frustrated? So easy. Paying attention to those things can be a helpful way to discern where are you actually putting your hope. See, if we're trusting that God is at work in our circumstances, then we can wait. Trusting that He's that potter working on us, putting the pressure where He needs to shape and fashion us. But if we're not looking at our lives in that sense, we're going to react to whatever we value most in life, whether it's comfort, whether it's security, whether it's a bank account or a job. Those things will be able to make our emotions go up and go down just as quickly as Haman's did if they're where we're putting our hope. We see this in our society around us right now with so many people who don't know God. They're putting their hope in governors, in the president, in experts to save them from this pandemic. And when those people prove flawed or incomplete or imperfect, as all of them are, they react over the top, demonizing them or calling them next to the Messiah when they do the right thing. Their hopes are dependent on the powers in this world rather than the one who holds the world in his hands. When Esther committed herself to identify with the people of God, she said, if I perish, I perish. As we walk through these days of pandemic, where this sickness comes through, and vast majority of us, it won't be serious. But for some, it will prove deadly. And as we think about that, am I going to be one of the whatever percentage ends up getting this serious and dying? How do we live with hope? Well, we remember God's providential care. We remember Psalm 31, verse 15. my times are in his hands. We remember Psalm 139, that all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. And so we go forward in life, seeking to do our job, to love our families and our friends, to take care of our neighbors, taking proper precautions, but also remembering that I am his and he is mine. That he is my God and I am his child. And when my time comes, it'll come when God wants it to. And I can trust that he'll pick the right time. And so when you deal with uncertainty, anxiety, frustration, remember, he is Almighty God, but he's also loving Father. And he's the one pulling the strings. And he will bring everything to his appointed end. Listen to these words from Romans chapter 8 as we close. Starting at verse 18. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. The creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved, but hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what he already has? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. So, brothers and sisters in Christ, be strong, take heart, and wait for the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Amen. God bless. Till next week.